This is The Hub with me, Karen Giannoni. Coming up, I'll ask a nuclear expert how Japan can cope with the crisis facing it at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant.
Sure, so you're saying that the authorities are moving people out if they're within the immediate vicinity of the plant. It sounds like a little bit beyond that and therefore can't get any official help.
Exactly, but we're about 80 kilometres northwest of the plant, but south of us is chaos, to say the least.
All right, we'll leave it there. Good luck to you, James, and your family. Thanks very much indeed for joining us this evening. Let's talk now to Laura Hughes and Sean Palmer. They are actually two expat English teachers here in Yamagata. They are from Wales originally, and they've been living here for the last 2 years. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. First of all, what difficulties have you been having, Laura, in just coping with everyday problems like getting enough food?
So far, really, it's mainly supermarket queues are the big problem. They're stretching quite far and there's about an hour's wait, and the food that you're able to get in supermarkets is limited. And also, most convenience stores are either run out of food or are limiting to about 5 items per person. So it's possible in Yamagata to get food, and there are some fresh fruit and vegetables available, but it's limited, and again it's a long wait. So people are trying to buy what they can at the moment, worrying about what the coming week will bring, really.
Sure, I mean, we've seen a lot of empty shelves in convenience stores and supermarkets around here. Sean, what about petrol? I know that you guys live a little bit away from work here. It must be difficult just getting to your place of work.
Yeah, petrol stations here in the eastern Tohoku region have been severely affected by this earthquake, especially because a lot of the petrol, I think, comes from Sendai port, which obviously was severely affected by the tsunami. So yeah, many people are finding it difficult to go to work. Petrol stations are either closed or they have massive queues and limit the amount of petrol you can buy to about 10 litres, I think, which is not much at all. So many schools have closed because students can't get to work, trains can't run, and yeah, people are finding it very difficult to get around.
Yeah, a difficult situation all round. Very briefly, we know that a number of expats have been taking an opportunity in the last few days to actually get out of the country. Are you guys now contemplating leaving?
If the situation gets worse and if we are given a definite idea of what's happening, then we will consider it. But at the moment, with not really knowing what's happening, we don't want to just make a rash decision and leave, because obviously we've got a job and friends and our whole life is here at the moment. So we don't want to make any rash decisions as yet.
All right, we'll leave it there, Laura. And Sean, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Of course, to add to the aftershocks, the tsunami warnings, making it difficult for the relief operation to fully get into gear here, the weather has now turned. It is snowing, it is freezing, and that will, of course, make the relief effort even more difficult. And with that, it's back to you.
Clive Murray, Clive there in Yamagata. Clive, thanks very much for now. Radiation's been released into the atmosphere in Japan after a third explosion and fire at the Fukushima nuclear power plant. A man has been pulled from the rubble 96 hours after the earthquake. More than 2,000 others died in the disaster. Thousands more are still unaccounted for. Well, let's get more now on the unfolding situation in Japan. A short time ago, I spoke to Sharon Squassoni, who's Director and Senior Fellow of the Proliferation Prevention Programme at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. I asked her about the announcement that Monday's explosion at the Fukushima plant's Unit 2 may have affected the integrity of its primary containment vessel.
This is what everyone has been watching for. We know that these hydrogen explosions have damaged the secondary containment, which is the actual reactor building, but that is not nearly as important as that primary containment vessel. And so the question is, has the fuel melted and is now damaging the steel containment vessel in which it sits, in which case then the radiation can flow out from there. Then you've got molten fuel. I don't know what the answer is, and that's part of the challenge in any crisis like this, knowing exactly what's going on.
Well, I must underline, of course, it only says may. It says, it doesn't say it has affected, it says it may have affected the integrity of that primary containment vessel, but very significant, you say, nonetheless.
Well, I think, and you know, there's a lot of guesswork, there's a lot of calculation here.
Indeed. Can I ask you about the level of information? I mean, are you happy with the amount of information being provided? I mean, there has been criticism of the power company today from the Japanese government.
Right. You know, I've been following the Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO. I've been following their updates. I actually get them electronically on email. And there was a time when you got a lot of information, and then there was a lot less information, and now there's a little more information. You know, these people are under tremendous stress. This is not an incident at one reactor, it's incidents at 4 reactors. And so, and in an accident like this, just as in 3 Mile Island, there's always a question of how much information to release that's useful rather than simply scaring the public. It's a very tough call.
Nuclear expert Sharon Squassoni. Now, the European Union's energy chief says the EU has decided to apply stress tests to see how its 143 nuclear plants would react in emergencies. The Energy Commissioner, Günther Oettinger, made the announcement after a meeting of ministers and nuclear regulators in Brussels. Well, I was joined on the hub by a correspondent there, Chris Morris. He explained what the stress tests may mean.
We've already seen reaction from across Europe, for example, from the German government yesterday suspending its agreement to extend the life of nuclear power stations, and obviously now, at a European level, concern to make sure that safety procedures are done in the best possible way. What the Commissioner has said is that there has been general agreement at this meeting that stress tests should take place. They will be voluntary because there's nothing in EU law at the moment which suggests that the European Union can force member states to take part in such tests. But in his words, most countries were there and nobody dissented from that opinion. So I think there would be quite a considerable amount of peer pressure involved in making sure that once all the details are finalised about exactly what these tests would involve and when they would take place, he said it would be this year, that everyone takes part, not just within the EU. He also mentioned European neighbours such as Turkey, Switzerland, even Russia, he said, because we all benefit from greater safety.
Chris Morris there in Brussels.
Global markets fall sharply as investors start to assess the costs of Japan's earthquake, tsunami and nuclear crisis. And Germany closes 7 nuclear power stations as Europe considers putting all its reactors through stress tests. Hello, welcome to World Business Report. I'm Jamie Robertson. Been another day of sharp falls across the global markets. The Nikkei, it started the falls. It closed down 10.6% and led the way for markets in Asia, Europe and Wall Street. European stocks fell over fears that Japan's earthquake may undermine supply chains for global manufacturers. The German DAX index dropped 5%. That was led by tech companies and car makers. They, of course, rely on Japanese suppliers for crucial parts. Here's Julia Caesar.
World stocks have hit 2.5-month lows, oil prices have fallen and the yen surged after reports of rising radiation near Tokyo triggered a 10% fall in Japanese stocks, hurting risky assets across the board. In the face of the country's biggest crisis since World War II, Japanese leaders tried to calm investors as stock markets fell.
You'd expect the stock market to fall because of the big economic shock that's taken place, but superimposed on that, because there's so much uncertainty, not least about this nuclear aspect, that at times like that you see investors just selling.
Finance Minister Yoshihiko Noda says the market's fall was the response to temporary factors, but acknowledged the government and the Bank of Japan needed to ease anxiety among the public and investors. Car makers, shipbuilders and technology companies worldwide are now scrambling to secure suppliers after the disaster shut a swathe of factories in Japan, disrupting the global supply chain. Japan accounts for 1/5 of the world's semiconductor production, including about 40% of flash memory chips used in everything from smartphones, tablets and computers.
Everything relies on semiconductors today. I mean, literally, you can't imagine any product other than food that doesn't. So it affects every company. Each and every one of us will be affected.
Across Europe, tech firms are under pressure over supply worries, with Germany's Infineon one of the hardest hit. Luxury goods companies continued their slide as investors worry sales will suffer in Japan. And car makers are also causing concern as Japan's 3 largest car makers cease production and report thousands of new vehicles have been damaged. Julia Caesar, BBC News.
Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel has said that she is temporarily closing 7 reactors and reviewing the country's nuclear energy strategy. This afternoon in Europe, the EU energy chief said that he wanted nuclear plants to undergo stress tests to prove their safety, not only in the 27 EU countries, but also in neighbouring states as well. Companies associated with the nuclear power industry have seen sharp falls in their share prices. German utilities E.ON and RWE both fell over 4%. Well, let's get more on this with Cash Burchett, who is a European energy analyst from Global Insight in London. Cash, do you think we've reached a watershed in the development of nuclear power globally, really?
Well, it's certainly fair to say that we've seen a watershed in European nuclear power. Up until recently, the European Union was on the verge of what's been described as a nuclear renaissance. Governments had worked to increase the role of nuclear power in their generation mix with a view to decarbonising the power grids, essentially. There had been good progress on that. Public opinion had shifted well in favour of nuclear power, but in light of the recent earthquake in Japan, that's all in jeopardy now for sure.
Do you think if public perception of nuclear power now turns against it, will we see the politicians coming behind it? Because I know that in Germany in particular there have been some big protests against nuclear power really quite recently.
Yeah, that's true. It's important to remember that the attitudes towards nuclear power vary substantially between different states. So in Germany, over the weekend, we saw protests of over 10,000 people descending on Berlin. Those protests were actually planned well in advance of the earthquake in Japan. They were protesting against the extension of the nuclear fleet, which was recently agreed by the Merkel administration. So that just goes to show how, how controversial nuclear power is in Germany. By contrast, you look at somewhere like France, where nuclear power is woven into the fabric of society almost. EDF is a national energy champion. It's a source of great pride for the country. So it will depend on the state in question as to how far politicians will react to these changes in public opinion.
But briefly, if not nuclear, what?
Well, the big winner from this will likely be gas. The reason for that is twofold. First of all, gas emits far less carbon dioxide than the major alternative, which is coal. Secondly, gas is quite cheap and quick to build, so investors will see a reasonably fast return on their investment. So if the EU plans to maintain its carbon emission reduction targets, then the likelihood is that gas-fired capacity will step into the breach to replace any nuclear projects which will be decommissioned as a result of this.
Cash Burchett, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
There have been sharp falls on Wall Street, second day on Japan fears. Caroline Hepko's the New York Stock Exchange. Yesterday was a controlled fall. Today we're close to panic, I got the impression.
Well, we're down about 1.8% on the Dow Jones today. The volumes are extremely light, though, and that does add really to the volatility of the market because a lot of people have gone for safe haven assets. But you are right, Jamie, there is concern here in the US because this nuclear crisis in Japan could have impacts on companies here in the US, like General Electric, which has a partnership with a Japanese maker and has made some of the casings that go around the nuclear power plants in Japan, but also that there could be so many other ramifications, not just the knock on the world's third largest economy, but also the hit to supplies, to manufacturers here in the US, and so many other things.
Yeah, I was just trying to go through some of the other areas which may be affected. I know luxury stocks, we were talking yesterday about luxury stocks which have got hit very hard. I know Tiffany's got hit quite badly. What other areas?
Well, luxury stocks are definitely one to watch because Japan is such a huge market for people like Tiffany's, but also Coach.